What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Scratch Agency podcast, hosted by Scratch Agents for Scratch Agents. My name is Stephen Turnbull, founder of T5 Insurance Services in Clinton, New York. We'll get into that maybe in a little bit. Joined by my co-host, Mr. Sean Fitzgerald, founder of LAF Advisors in Long Island, New York. Sean, it's been 3 weeks since we've done this, and I got to put the training wheels back on, I think. We haven't recorded in a while. You've been busy over there.
Busy, yeah. Oh, my God. 2 kids under 2 now. Running a Scratch business, trying to be a good father, good husband. It's a lot of work. I got to be honest.
You got to hurry up and have one more to keep up with Maverick, who's got 3 under 3 over there. I don't know how he's doing it either.
Yeah, maybe in a few years we got to write a book on it. You know, if we come out of this successful, you know.
There you go. Well, we're going to jump right into it today. We talked a little bit on the show. I'm super excited to have our next guest on because I've been following him on the social channels for the last couple of months and really don't know a whole lot about his story and his journey and all of that. So we're going to jump right into it and welcome Abe Gibson on the show today. Abe, thanks for taking the time to join us. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. I just like Sean, we had our first about a month ago now.
Congratulations.
And it has thank you. It has rocked our world. But I can imagine doubling this. So kudos to you, man.
Is now the time that I start complaining about taking care of my 2 dogs, and then you guys can just come at me about
your fur babies?
Stephen, you can't talk for the next 30 minutes.
Yeah, I'll just let you guys
let us vent here, okay?
Yeah.
Neither one of us has slept in 3 weeks.
Well, Abe, for people who are learning about you for the first time or meeting you here for the first time on the Scratch Agency podcast, why don't you introduce yourself and we'll get into what we want to talk about.
Yeah, I feel like at this point I've probably talked to like 90% of the industry because I got my start in the industry selling to independent agencies. First at a company called Edge where we did virtual assistants during COVID. So everybody was kind of, exploring that. So I got to talk to so many, agency owners from Scratch agencies to larger established ones. And then I joined as like the first sales guy at Better Agency. So I got to meet a ton of people there. We have a ton of mutual connections through that. And then from there started a Scratch agency with some other people in the industry. So we started Cover Your SaaS, which was a kind of a niche Scratch agency. I had some great co-founders, Ciara Gravier. We had David Carruthers on the team, Chris Langill, Derek Burke. So kind of like a who's who that we're for some reason decided to say, hey, we should work with this guy Abe on this. So we launched Cover Your SaaS a few years ago, and then just kind of naturally started to migrate into wholesale because we focus mainly on cyber and tech, which are somewhat unique lines of business that a lot of people, really like to use brokers for. And so, as I was posting stuff on LinkedIn and Facebook about it, I'd have retail agents, other retail agents say, hey, I got this account, I don't really work with cyber, could you do the cyber for me? And so I was like, well, if I change up my model, at least I'd have more room to pay them if we're going to do this. So we decided to go wholesale, and now I'm able to help them, but also, pay them in a significant way. So that's where we're at.
That's awesome. Abe, tell us about the early days, because most of our audience is Scratch agents. Tell us of the early days of Cover Your SaaS. Like, I know you're still in the early days, but that first year, like, what was it like leading with? Because I know a little bit about your story, like how you lead with cyber. Tell me kind of how that whole process works. I think if we get in the nitty gritty with that, I think there could be a lot of value there, because I don't think a lot of people who do business insurance or want to get into the commercial insurance space think to lead with cyber. Or like me specifically, I don't lead with cyber, but I definitely try to use it as a wedge if I sit down with someone and they don't have cyber, or they have a policy with different, limitations and things like that. So tell me a little bit how you leveraged like just attacking it and starting the conversation with cyber.
Yeah. So coming, from like the SaaS side of the industry, not really selling insurance, I had kind of thought like, well, how are we going to attack this? Are we going to kind of go like the generalist, small commercial route and kind of focus on my local geography? I didn't really have that option. I mean, I could have done that. It would have been a lot harder than, it is for some. I had just kind of moved to this newer area where I was. So I didn't really have like any existing relationships with anybody. So it'd have been like starting cold and a lot more difficult than I would have wanted it to be. So I said, well, all right, what's something that's kind of like up and coming? What's a line of business that like a lot of people don't really specialize in, but it's kind of up and coming. Like, where's like the opportunity here for me? And so I found cyber. I'd had conversations with a lot of people about the opportunity there. It kind of seemed like a lot of people were leading with work comp, and there were a lot of just industries that had like really small work comp premiums, but they had probably pretty significant cyber premiums, and they weren't getting targeted by a lot of people. And so I was like, well, I'm kind of entering in, not knowing anything about commercial insurance, but the guy down the street that's selling commercial insurance doesn't know about cyber anyways. So we're kind of on a level playing field here. I don't know anything. Sure. You don't know anything. So, so that's how I kind of got started. And so it was kind of trial by fire. Like, I don't know a lot about this, but I'm going to like spend hours just reading these policies before I sell them and doing a lot of the things that, now it comes naturally. But we do some kind of unique things. Like, we try to take a work comp style approach to cyber too, because I think that work comp and cyber, there's a lot of carryover there. Cyber is becoming more of a requirement to do business for a lot of industries. So it's like, hey, you want to have a contract with to do business with a certain company. Well, a lot of times you're going to see cyber in that contract now. And then on top of that, like, there's ways for us to meaningfully impact premium. So if you think about a lot of people on the work comp side, they focus on, hey, this is your mod today. If we do X, Y, and Z over the next year, we can get your mod to this, and then you're going to reduce your total cost of risk. We can do a lot of that stuff too on cyber, and we can do it a lot quicker. We can do it within weeks instead of years. So that's kind of how we've approached it, and it's worked really well. And there's just like a whole side of this industry that I didn't even know existed. Like, there's like cyber accounts that are hundreds of thousands of dollars in premium, and I never thought like that kind of stuff existed. But like insurance usually does. There's always like a surprise, and there's always a niche, and there's always like accounts that are massive in certain industries, and it's just such a massive industry.
Totally. So, Abe, talk to me. Like, what percentage do you think of cyber policies you write are people that already have cyber policies versus people with no cyber policy? I mean, I would assume it's like very high percentage people already have a policy in place, right?
Probably not. It's probably more like 50-50. Okay. I would say it's probably 50-50. So we have a lot of people, and those are the ones that I love the most. I love having conversations and getting people to a point where they're purchasing their first cyber policy, because it's just like, it's like, man, like they see the value, and we were able to do a well enough job of showing them that they were able to take the step and go from 0 to 1. So I'd say in general about 50%. I think the statistics nowadays are like 30% of businesses, which I think is a little high, but 30% of businesses have some sort of cyber coverage. But there's so much opportunity out there.
Now, backing up to the early days, like Sean was talking about, you said something there when you were providing the example of the commercial guy down the street didn't know about cyber. You became familiar with cyber. I think in the last couple episodes, we've kind of talked about niching. We had Cameron Pasheba on, and we talked about all these things, and it's the same type of theme we're talking about here. What did you do from an educational standpoint? Because I think for yourself, because I think when people say, "Oh, I want to attack that," sometimes the biggest roadblock is, well, I don't know anything about it. And like you just said, well, I went to work, I read the policies, now everything's second nature, this and that. Talk to us and talk to the agents that are listening. Like, man, I love this side. I have a passion for X, and I could be really good at that, but I don't know anything about it. What's some advice for those people?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I didn't really ever find any valuable information in like any sort of like certifications or designation courses. A lot of them don't really touch cyber much. I'm sure for other niches and verticals, it makes sense. So for me, it was a lot of like DIY stuff. So I actually learned a lot from a few other agents who had been putting out a ton of content on their YouTube channels. Like I watched like probably hundreds of Hanley's videos because he touched on cyber. Ryan Hanley up in New York with Rogue Risk. I watched a lot of his stuff. I watched Gordon Coyle. He posts a lot of stuff about cyber. And then I watched like a lot of companies put out webinars. I just like became like a consumer of content. So like when I wasn't like sitting down working on something intentional, like if I was mowing the grass or if I was doing the dishes or whatever it was, I had my AirPods in and I had like some sort of content that I could consume, and I just became like obsessed with it. And then over the course of a few months, it's kind of scary how quickly you can pick things up. I think like there's a saying that I believe generally that if you read 3 books on any subject, you know more about that subject than probably like 90% of people in the world. So I tried to read like 6, 7, 8 books, and before you know it, I became more competent than most people. But you know, I still look today and I'm like, man, there's a lot of people that know a lot more about this stuff than I do. But I think that you can really pick up a lot really quickly if you just kind of become obsessed.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the smart answer, but just become obsessed and you'll get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like that's a trait you have to be, you know, I mean, if you want to be a top dog, so to speak, right? You have to have that. You have to have that obsession, right? Yep. I mean, Steven, I know you have that obsession. We'd be texting at 9 o'clock at night, 3 in the morning. we're working all the time, and that's because at some level we're obsessed with it, you know. Abe, talk to me with the cyber in particular, specifically because you niche in this. What is one of the most common wedges that you see? So when you sit down with someone and you see they have a policy in place, what's like one thing you instantly look for on the policy? Like, all right, do they have that exclusion or limitation? Like, what are a couple of things agents could look out for?
Yeah. So if we look at claims data, 96% of claims in cyber are first party. So I want to probably scan what the first party coverages look like. And usually most policies have it broken down pretty easy for you to read, and you can look at the different sublimits and things. But particularly cyber crime. So there's kind of like 3 different parts of a cyber insuring agreement. You have the first party coverages, which would include cyber crime, but they're kind of separate in their own way too. I don't want to make it too in the weeds, but it's first party, third party, cyber crime. Cyber crime is what you think of like social engineering. Somebody's sending you an email and it has a fake invoice on it and you pay that email, things like that. Those are like the most frequent claims that we have in cyber, but they're also the most sublimited out of all the different coverages. So I'm going to look there. So a lot of the times it's either completely excluded or like it's sublimited to like 50,000. And in general, with a robust policy, we could get that up to like 250,000. It's kind of like the max for most carriers. So that's one thing I'd be looking for. Additionally, I'd be looking for the way the policy responds to claims. So is it a reimbursement or is it a pay on behalf policy? You're going to hear this a lot from like David Carruthers and some of the other people in the industry. Yeah. This is a huge wedge. Let's say, for example, you guys go into your office and you're locked out of your computers and it says, you know, you've been hacked. You know, here's a Bitcoin wallet. Pay me $200,000 in Bitcoin by, you know, Thursday, or I'm going to leak all your data or delete all your data and you're not going to have access to it. And for some industries, you might have a bunch of fines associated with that. Like, you need to do something, right? If you have a pay on behalf policy, which is what I would say is favorable, you can call up the insurance carrier and say, hey, this happened to me. They're pretty much going to take care of that for you. They're going to pay for everything on your behalf. They have people that they have on their team that all they do is negotiate with these cyber criminals. So they'll say, hey, you know, we helped you out last week and, you know, we got you, we negotiated a pretty good deal for you. Like, can you help us out here and like reduce that ransom? Yeah. Like they're like on the phone with these like guys in the Ukraine or Russia and negotiating for you. Like, do you really want to have to deal with any of that? If you have a reimbursement policy, a lot of this stuff you have to do on your own. And then you get reimbursed from the carrier. So that's a huge one. It's just that fine print language, but when you explain that to them, like, do you really want to call up the FBI to make sure that you're not making a payment to a known terrorist organization, and then you're gonna get in trouble with the federal government? Like, they're just like, all right, I'll pay maybe like an extra like 5% to have it be paid on behalf.
Yep. Abe, now let's go a little more into the weeds as far as building the scratch agency, right? Talk to us, and this is a question I'd like to ask a little bit more. Talk to us about, like, what was one of the biggest struggles you had with starting a scratch agency, and what did you learn from it? Did you get better from it? All that fun stuff.
There's a couple things, right? So having been an employee and a salesperson at Better Agency, that's where I kind of cut my teeth. I didn't necessarily understand the struggle that comes with like building a scratch agency and the technology aspect of things, like getting your tech stack set up and just the different options that you have and the expenses associated with it. And there's like no perfect platform that exists, and like it's overwhelming. Exactly. It's like I'm out here like trying to market and sell what I'm doing, and then I'm also having to, it's like so many different hats you have to wear. And that was the one hat that I was like, man, I really feel like there should be some sort of solution here that I don't have to do all of this work to build, this kind of system. So that was one of them. And then another one is like, you can, and this is more just like general to business, you can build what you think of being like the best solution out there, but it really just boils down to marketing and sales. Like if you neglect that, like you're not going to sell anything. I don't believe in the build it and they'll come. I think you got to go to them and you got to like shove it in their face that this is what you've done. Because we just live in a very noisy world. So that was one, because I thought, we're niching in SaaS. Nobody niches in SaaS. We're niching in cyber and tech. Nobody's niching in that. I just thought it'd be a no-brainer. And turns out I had to pick up the phone and dial. I had to do all of the things that everybody else has to do and get it in front of people.
And so talk to us more about kind of the niche. Like, what was the approach? Pick up and dial, but like you are going after such a specific line of business, a specific target audience. What was the approach from your standpoint of how the first year, 2 years would look when you're planning that? Because, for myself, I'm a real retail agency, right? Personal and commercial, set up a spot on the corner. I can write your home and auto. I can write your donut shop, whatever it is. I mean, it's a little bit more easier for you. You're going after a specific audience. What did that plan kind of look like?
Yeah. So the way that we approached it was, generally speaking, a lot of the startups, there's hubs. And we wanted to kind of play in the startup space. That's where I had been employed and had connections. So there's hubs around the country, which make things a little bit easier, because I knew that there was enough business for us to write in the Salt Lake City area, the Phoenix area, the Austin area, the Nashville area. I could kind of narrow down my geography a little bit, just from a licensing perspective, but also just like being able to target. So if we wanted to go, to an area, I knew that there'd be multiple startups in that general, kind of metro.
Sure.
So that was one aspect of it. Another aspect of it was I wanted to kind of kill multiple birds with one stone. And the way that I found that being the best bang for my buck in terms of marketing was starting a podcast. So we had a podcast where we would interview founders and CEOs in the startup spaces that we were operating in. And the reason that we did that is, okay, so I'm out here handling, just like any other scratch agency owner, I'm out here, handling submissions. I'm having client calls. I'm doing service. We're doing all of these different things. Like, to be able to like build like case studies and all these different marketing materials, it's a lot of work. And I don't know if I have the time to do it. But I thought, hey, I can hop on an hour podcast, and what I can do is I can kind of kill multiple birds with one stone. I can say, hey, we're going to have this podcast that I can release as marketing. I'm going to be able to have a conversation with my ideal client. We can splice and dice the podcast and take out highlights and be able to use that as content. We can transcribe the podcast and turn it into a blog. So I tried to maximize what my time and for me personally in B2B, I thought that a podcast is probably the most bang for your buck in terms of just what you're doing to market yourself. I think it's a no-brainer. So that was kind of how we approach it. Was the podcast was the real core of what we were doing, and then it freed us up to be able to do the other stuff well too.
Mm. What advice could you give to people about maximizing your time?
Oh, you go, Steve.
What advice? And the reason I asked that question, I know it's very broad, but in the introduction there, you're talking about how many different things you got your hands in right now. Just generally for scratch agents that are listening, what's some advice that you could give for maximizing your time throughout just a day? Let's look at a day and see.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, and this was another thing, like I had always heard of people talk about shiny object syndrome, and I had never experienced that until I started a scratch agency, because there was always something that was being marketed to me that was like better than what I was doing right now. Yep. And you can chase so many different rabbit trails, just like going after the next thing, and like because you think it's going to improve what you're doing. But I think for me it was like once I built like the bare bones of what I needed to be able to operate, it always goes back to like marketing and sales. That's really, I had to tell myself over and over again, that's really all that matters. Because if you're not writing business, like you're not able to stay in business, and you're not able to help people. Because if you genuinely believe that you can help people, the best thing that you can do is go out and sell it. So that's what I had to keep telling myself, is like, it's very easy to get, excited or chase these rabbit holes of, tech or whatever it might be, but stay focused on marketing and sales, and over time, everything else will take care of itself, and you can implement over time. We don't have to play the startup game that, the VC backed companies typically do, which is like growth at all costs. Like we can do things sustainably, and the way to do that is just focus on marketing and sales.
Well, and I think that applies for it applies for anybody listening in the scratch field. I mean, one of the best things that Mike Crowley ever said to me when him and I were working on starting up T5, and he's a huge mentor of mine, as most people know, is nothing matters besides getting people in the door and selling insurance right now. And one of the best things he ever said was that a piece of technology, a tool you bring into the agency, it needs to solve a problem right away. So the management system, that makes sense. You got to manage these people that you're bringing in, right? The CRM, there's different things in here. But to your point, Abe, when you start an agency, all of a sudden everybody wants to be your friend, and they're calling and emailing you, and they're going to make this, your life's going to be so much easier. And yeah, it's an absolute shiny object distraction. But all that matters is the revenue and the policies and getting people in the door, especially in the first couple of years.
Yep.
Yeah. Go listen to that Mike Sharp episode. I mean, he made that more clear than anybody. And he took it to the extreme. Hey, from 9 to 5, I'm not doing anything except prospecting.
Yep.
I'll do all that other crap before 9, and after 5, I'm like, he's got a point.
That's how you win.
Yeah. Yeah. And then from the technology standpoint, it could get it. We've talked about it a few times. It gets overwhelming. I mean, Steven touched on it, but does it save you time? Does it save you or your team time? Does it save you any money? And can it make your process and the client experience more efficient? If it doesn't, back to what Steven said, solving a problem. If it doesn't, honestly, it's just best to move on. Because even if it does help slightly, you have to think about all the time you're going to put into learning that system, having to train your team on that system, having to work process and procedures of how to use that system. So yeah, I mean, I would say I don't want to say it's a downside of our space, but man, there's so many different vendors and stuff out there now. It's back to what you were saying, Abe. It's totally overwhelming, man.
Yeah, and if it doesn't move the needle like significantly, and the way that it would move the needle significantly is if it solves a big problem.
So yeah.
I think that it's probably better to wait until you're at a point where you could delegate a lot of this stuff, but at your time as a scratch founder of an agency, and you don't have a lot of staff, or you don't have any staff, your time is incredibly valuable, and it continues to become even more valuable. and it's a lot. You get a better return on your investment with that kind of stuff if you can find ways to delegate it. But if you don't, if you as a scratch agency owner, you probably don't have that luxury quite yet.
Well, and I think
Totally.
going back to something else that we were talking about, do your homework on it, right? When I asked Abe, how'd you get into cyber and learned about it? You said mainly you learned from other agents. You watched every one of Ryan Henley's videos. You watched other people's videos. Go out there and talk to other people. Have you used X tool? Does it help? Do you think it makes sense? I can't tell you how many conversations I'd call up Crowley and say, I just found out about this. It's going to change my agency. It's going to be great. No, it doesn't. That's stupid. Move on. Oh, okay. Right. And you need that because we talk about how lonely it can be when you're starting a scratch agency. We talk about all these things you need, and the ability to bounce ideas off of each other, and from an educational standpoint, from a tool standpoint, is so easy now between all the groups that we're in, all the different connections you can make in the industry. So just do your homework on those certain things. All right, I'm going to get off my horse on that point because I'll just keep rolling and rolling and rolling. Hey,
but it's a luxury. It's a luxury that we have in this industry that we're so collaborative. Sure. I've never seen anything like it. It's wild. Just to see how much people share and want to help. I've actually told friends that are in other industries, and they're just like, what are you talking about? Like competitors, even within like the same geography, are like helping each other. Like that just doesn't happen in other places.
And even let's just be real. I mean, even the vendors are awesome people. You know, and I feel like that's a hard part of it. Like I sit down and I talk to some of these vendors and I'm like, this guy's awesome. I want to give him business because he's just so freaking cool and I just want to be around him all the time. You know what I mean? And it's tough to say no sometimes, but you know, that's something I'm just starting to get better at. Steven knows I've made a few mistakes when I first opened, but I'm getting better at saying no to
I haven't made any mistakes from at all. So no, I don't know what you're talking about, Sean. Abe, let's pivot. Speaking about helping other agents and being resources, let's pivot into the wholesale thing and talk about that. You know, how did it come about and how can you help other retail agents today?
Yeah. So it's funny if you did listen to that James Jenkins episode, because he asked me that specific question about ever becoming a wholesaler, and I said nah. But pretty soon after that, it became apparent that was probably a good idea. So yeah, we started a wholesale division, and the whole idea is to help retail agents with placing cyber. It's just unlike most other lines. There's no, standard forms. Every form is different. They change. Everything changes like every single day. It's a very complicated line to stay on top of and to stay in the know if you're not doing it every single day. So we work with agencies of all different sizes. Like we work with some of the nationals, we work with scratch agencies, and we help them place cyber. It's a lot of fun. I love working with insurers, but it's also a lot of fun to work with other agents. And it's just a growing industry. So if I what I love to do is, more than like getting insureds to their first cyber policy, the thing that excites me even more than that is when agents sell their first cyber policy, because it'll be funny. To me, it's like a no-brainer that almost without exception, every business at the very minimum should be offered a cyber policy, regardless of what industry they're in. But, I've spent hours having to try to convince agents that, cyber is necessary. Like one told me, he's like, I get it. And like, I'll offer it, mainly from like an E&O perspective, but he's like, have you ever actually seen like a claim? Like, does this stuff actually happen? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, it was hard for me not to laugh, because I'm like, yeah, I've seen businesses go out of business because of this stuff. Mm-hmm. But there's like such a gap there. And that gets me really pumped, is when I see agents really start to take the dive and say, hey, I don't really know all about this stuff, but, for the sake of the client and the sake of, maybe the additional sake of my agency, I'm going to start offering this. Like, that gets me really fired up.
So talk to us about that process for retail agents. And I think one of the things I've definitely learned in my short months of starting the agency is, like you just said, staying in your lane. I think the listeners that have listened for a while know I'm mainly personal lines. Sean's mainly commercial lines. If something comes across my table, it's like, I can't confidently do this. And Sean, here, take a look at it. Can you help? Because it's best interest for the client too, which is exactly what we're talking about with the cyber stuff on your end. So how does that process work if someone was to partner with you from a wholesale standpoint?
Yeah, we work like most other brokers, on one-off submissions. One of the things that we've been doing kind of recently that I think is a really good idea is, we can bulk quote your entire book. So I think that that's a huge thing. Is like, you don't have to know about cyber. You don't have to believe in cyber. But you do have an exposure. And I know of an agency in Tennessee. They had a CPA firm that was their client. They didn't offer cyber insurance. They were hit with a pretty nasty cyber attack, and now they're suing the agent for not offering it. So fortunately, we're at this point right now with cyber. I don't know how long it'll last, but we can get like indications and quotes with basically like no information. So to me, I'm just like, let's include a quote. I don't care if it gets bound, but let's include an indication or a quote in every conversation, every touch point we have, making sure that we're talking about this so that we're not going to get wrapped up in any lawsuits, and we're also, just taking care of our clients. So that's one way that a lot of people work with us.
Now, are there ever cases
what does the
where
submission look like? So
go ahead, Sean. That's exactly what I was going to ask.
What would a good submission look like for you? Like, what information should it include?
Yeah. So, on the small business side of things, in cyber, I'd kind of define that as like sub 70 million in revenue for most accounts. I think a good submission is, we would scan their domain. A lot of small business cyber carriers are doing these external vulnerability scans, and I have my issues with them, but they're a part of the process, and we have to deal with it. I don't think they're very accurate, and I don't think that they tell a very good story of their cyber risk posture, but a lot of these carriers love to use them in the process. So what we try to do is get out in front of that. So before we submit, let's do a scan. Let's see what we're dealing with so that we don't have any surprises. So that's step one. If there's anything that we need to fix, like we can, work with their MSP, or, if they have somebody in-house that handles their IT, we can get that stuff fixed up. It's usually doesn't take much time at all, and it's not very complicated for somebody that works in IT. And then at that point, then we would submit. And with small business cyber, we have the luxury of being able to get indications, so we don't have to fill out some application. And cyber is kind of notorious for having some difficult applications. We can usually get indications with like their domain, their website, their revenue. Do they have MFA? Yes or no? And then at that point, we're able to get like 10 quotes or indications, see where we're at with pricing, make sure it kind of fits within their strategy or budget. And then from there, then we can fill out the application. But, we're able to kind of gauge the market before we, hand them that thick app.
So I don't have to do an Accord 125, 140. No. I don't have to do, okay.
Say no more.
No.
Say no more.
I know. It's a great line. I'm telling you, I'm like, it's not hard to write. Like, I can get you a proposal pack with 10 quotes with just like basic contact information.
For anybody listening that's thinking, well, that CPA firm in Tennessee, that agent, couldn't it be me? Yes, it can. Right. And I mean, what an incredible opportunity to partner with Abe and just say, here's the expert. We work together. And I think it's so powerful when you're talking to the client too, to say, this individual is the one that I work with, whoever that is, right? And they're very good at this, and they do this every single day, and that's why we work with them, and that's why we're going to bring them in. Now, is there ever any situations, Abe, where you go into the meetings virtually or whatever and help these agents let the client understand the policies more, especially if it's not something they do every day?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love doing stuff like that. I'm a personal believer in like minimizing my branding. Like, I don't need my logo slapped on everything. Like, I want to be like a white labeled extension of your team. So pull me into email threads, pull me into, Zoom calls. depending on the size of the account, I might even be able to visit in person, depending on where it's at. But yeah, I love that kind of stuff because, I'm a part of, your team. I rely on you, you rely on me, kind of breaking down those walls. Like, I'm not going to write your account. I'm working with you to write this account. And I think when you kind of break down those communication barriers, I think it ends up being a better experience for the insured. And that's probably the thing that we should be caring about most. So the people that adopt that and use us in those ways tend to have really great outcomes.
And you're working in every state.
Yeah.
Perfect. One thing I wanted to touch on, because this is kind of where my mind goes when we talk about, I wouldn't say cyber is a unique line of business anymore, but it's still not the usual line of business that every agent talks about, right?
Yep.
And I think one of the things as agents, specifically in the commercial space, that I hear a lot is there's so many different things to offer the client, right? I sit down with a restaurant owner. I have to think of liability insurance. I got to think of liquor liability. I got to think of the commercial property. I got to think of EPLI. I got to think of flood. I got to think of umbrella. Do they have their health insurance set up right? Do they have their cyber? I mean, the list just, I felt like if I brought up all of those things in one meeting, they'd be like, what the hell is wrong with this guy? But yeah. I think it's important to bring that up because, I think there is a way to have a list, right? Here we go, process and procedures. I think there is a right way to have a list with the coverages written out and say, hey, do you have these if they're not a client now, like, hey, do you have these policies in force? And if you don't, do you know how cyber helps protect you? Do you know about this coverage? Do you know about that coverage? Because at that point, you're just more advising them. You're not just trying to push another policy down their throat. But I think that's a common a common struggle that a lot of agents deal with, and I've dealt with it too. Like, man, like, when's enough?
Yeah.
But if you're a trusted advisor, you got to be. I feel like it is your role,
bingo,
to make sure you at least discuss those things and that they're aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's something that we've tried to make easier. And some of the agents have conversations, and some of them just kind of send the proposal. But what we've built out in the proposal is you'll have your different indications, so you can see what pricing is going to be, and maybe it's a surprise at how cheap it is, or maybe it's a surprise at how expensive it is, depending on the insurance buyer. And then from there, it's going to break down some of the terms. Like, cyber has some kind of quirky terms, like, what is bricking, what is crypto jacking, all those kind of things that they might see. And like, okay, this is what that means. And this is how, why it's important. And then it's going to break down some claims examples that are tailored to that industry. So help them kind of like see themselves in these examples. Like, oh, I could actually see this potentially happening. Like, I make a big purchase order, and my vendor was the victim of a cyber attack. And I actually wired funds to the cyber criminals account because I didn't verify. Like, something like that. It could be like, oh, it's not like some guy sitting on his computer like trying to break into my system. It's like, I just paid a fraudulent invoice. And I think that they can realize that. And then from there, like, if they still haven't grasped it, why they need it, one of the things I like to say is, like, with every cyber proposal, there should be an acknowledgement of rejected coverage, saying, like, making them sign a piece of paper that says, hey, I know that I need cyber, and my agent has offered it to me and explained it to me, but I'm still going to decide to reject this coverage, and I'm going to sign this form. That's like the last kind of ditch effort to kind of stress its importance. But I think it's great to have that paper trail too for your E&O.
Yeah, I have that on my decline coverage form. What cyber is, we offered it, they're declining it, they have to sign it.
Yep.
Man,
that's what you need to do.
Good stuff. Well, Abe, as we look to wrap this up, please give the agents listening how they can get in touch with you, any materials or anything they can follow along, or just, the wholesaling thing, how they can get more involved with what you're doing.
Yeah. So I live really on LinkedIn. I'm on there as Abe Gibson. Try to post daily content. You can find me at scenarios.com, coveryoursaas.io. I'm sure there's not many Abe Gibsons, so if you search that, you'll probably find me somewhere. But I just want to say I'm thankful for you guys and what you guys are doing. I think starting a scratch agency was one of the most impactful things in my life, and the people in the community that you guys are a part of and building. It is special, and I try not to take it for granted. So I appreciate you guys doing this and kind of, spreading the good news about kind of this industry and, the ability that we have to start these businesses and help people.
For sure. I appreciate you saying that.
Thanks,
that. If we hit everybody with the last question, and with the amount of things you have your different hats on for, I'm super excited to see what you're going to say to this. But tomorrow morning, you wake up and you have to start over. Day one, you don't own any company. You're not working. You got to jump into the insurance industry and do it all over again. What do you do differently?
I would personally say I would, of course, get my license, and then I would probably go after middle market and lead with cyber just from day one. There's such a gap. I've seen small, 2 or 3 man teams, BOR accounts from Marsh and Aon in the middle market, because there's such a need and there's not a lot of people that are focusing on this. So I'd probably go back and say, hey, from the get-go, I'm not going to be afraid of these larger accounts and just go after it.
Love that.
Yeah, that makes sense, because if you could write the cyber, you could potentially, you have a really good shot at AOR and the other lines of business if they like you as a person too. So if you're helping them with the insurance and they have a better relationship with you than their current agent, it's almost it's a home run,
Yep, exactly.
Anybody that listens to this that trickles into commercial, maybe they're not focused 100% on commercial, maybe they are, and they're not talking about cyber, do me a favor and talk to Abe. Think of the amount of opportunity that we've talked about in the last 40 minutes here. And also from an E&O aspect that you're putting your agency on the line for, of just not simply offering it and not bringing Abe into the conversations. Reach out to him. It is completely openly opened my eyes to it. Him and I will be talking soon about exactly that. And Abe, I just appreciate what you're doing for the industry and helping, the retail agents on that wholesale side. I think that's fantastic. And thanks for joining us. You talked a little bit about the community there. Before we wrap up here, I want to talk about something exciting that Sean and I have created. We got our website. I think on the last episode, I said it incorrectly. It is not the Scratch Agency Podcast. It is scratchagencypodcast.com. Right, Sean? I think I messed that up last time. So check us out at the website. At the top of the website, it says join our community. We have created a Telegram, which if you don't know what the Telegram is, it's like a Slack. Basically, in my opinion, it's a better Slack. But you can join us and make your own opinion about that. We've got about 10 or 11 agents in there already, I think, and it is just around the Scratch Agency community, people that are in the trenches. We've got one person in there that's in the middle of starting a Scratch Agency right now. We've got Brett Young, who started a Scratch Agency, and we've seen what he's done in there. So join the community. You can reach on and have talk to our guests and talk to the people that have been on. But everybody, that is another episode of the Scratch Agency Podcast. Thanks for joining us. Do us a favor, like the show, share the show, and subscribe. Most importantly, remember to dig down deep, believe in yourself, in your own future. We'll see you next week. Take care.